Tonight, is this man evil beyond belief?
I just want to make it very clear to anybody out there that Jeremy is a guilty party. He's not an innocent person. There are 5 dead people in churchyards and they're not going to come back.
Or wrongly convicted of killing his family?
I think this is one of the gravest miscarriages of justice that this country's ever seen. I really do.
Good evening and welcome to the Tonight programme. It's one of the most notorious and shocking crimes in living memory, a bloody massacre at a remote English farmhouse with a beautiful young model, her 2 sons and her parents shot dead. Now, nearly 26 years after Jeremy Bamber was jailed for life for murdering 5 members of his family, new forensic reports are casting doubt on his conviction. In tonight's exclusive, former detective and criminologist Mark Williams-Thomas takes a look at the new findings and hears from the man who, after all this time, is still protesting his innocence in Bamber The New Evidence.
The judge said, "I have to consider when it will be safe to release you to live in the community. I find it difficult to foresee whether it will ever be safe to release someone who has killed 5 members of his family, shooting 2 small boys asleep in their beds."
I've spent years investigating crime, and for me, the case of Jeremy Bamber remains one of the most fascinating and disturbing in modern criminal history. On the 7th of August 1985, at White House Farm in the village of Tolleshunt DArcy, Essex, 5 members of the same family were shot dead in a bloody massacre. Among the victims, 6-year-old twin boys. The police at first believed that beautiful former model and mother of the twins, Sheila Caffell, a diagnosed schizophrenic, had shot her family, then turned the gun on herself. But it was her brother, Jeremy Bamber, the sole surviving member of the immediate family, who was convicted of the killings.
It almost had everything, if you like, from a story point of view. Handsome young guy, ex-girlfriend, a jilted girlfriend giving evidence against him, and of course 5 deaths, including 2 6-year-old boys.
The judge called Bamber evil almost beyond belief. He is one of only a few prisoners who's been told he will spend his whole life behind bars. But Bamber has always protested his innocence. In 2002, his case went to the Court of Appeal, but the conviction was upheld. Now, 26 years since the original conviction, Jeremy Bamber has instructed a new legal team and submitted new evidence to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. I've seen that submission, and tonight I'm going to examine some of the evidence contained in it. Evidence that could, if accepted, lead to a second Court of Appeal hearing and ultimately, Bamber hopes, prove his innocence. August 6, 1985, White House Farm. Wealthy farmer Neville Bamber and his wife June are spending the evening with their adopted daughter Sheila and her twin sons Daniel and Nicholas. A few hours later, just before 3:30 a.m. on the 7th of August, local police receive a frantic call from Jeremy Bamber. He claims his father has just phoned him saying his sister Sheila Caffell has gone crazy and has a gun. 3:48 a.m. Police Sergeant Chris Buse is first to arrive at the farmhouse, followed minutes later by Jeremy Bamber.
So you arrive at the farmhouse, what then happens?
Jeremy reiterates what he's already said to the duty officer at Chelmsford Police Station, in that his father's phoned up, said that his sister has gone berserk. We then got him to go over what had happened, and he referred to his sister Sheila as being schizophrenic, having a history of mental illness, and that he was concerned for the people that were in the house.
Sergeant Buse calls for backup and the firearms unit is dispatched. Bamber is outside the farmhouse with police officers when he says he sees something moving in one of the upstairs windows.
When we were doing the perimeter check, Jeremy said, "Hang on, is that movement up there?" And I looked and I thought, and I moved my head, and yeah, and we thought we could see movement. But then I thought, hang on, and just by moving your head a little bit, there was It wasn't a really dark night, but it wasn't a bright moonlit night. There was moonlight though, and I think it was a reflection off a window pane on one of the upper floors. So I was quite satisfied there was no movement.
7:45 a.m. Armed police storm the house and discover 5 bodies.
Neville Bamber was in the kitchen near the fire. Upstairs in the main bedroom, June Bamber's body was lying in the doorway, and on the far side of the bed was Sheila Caffell's body, and in an adjoining bedroom were the 2 bodies of the twins. It was quite apparent they had all suffered a number of wounds caused by bullets.
Sheila had 2 shotgun wounds to her throat. An open Bible was by her side. The rifle lay across her chest. The scene suggested Sheila had shot her family, then turned the gun on herself. But for those close to Sheila, like cousin David Bowflower, things didn't quite add up.
And it wasn't until we started putting the pieces together and realising that Sheila had been found in a state of without a hair out of place, no damages, her nails were still perfect, there was no signs of blood on her. Coupled with the fact she hadn't had any experience with guns, or very little, it didn't really make sense.
The farmhouse was locked from the inside that night, though Jeremy knew how to get in through a downstairs window. His behaviour following the murders troubled farm secretary and family friend Barbara Wilson.
He just wasn't sad in any way. I didn't see him sad, ever. And I went on the Friday after the killings to his home to pick up the wages and the money, and he was as happy as a lark.
Bamber looked set to inherit the family estate worth nearly £500,000. 3 days after the killings, police returned the farmhouse keys to Bamber's relatives. But family members were increasingly uneasy. They conducted their own search of the property and found in one of the cupboards a silencer that fitted the murder weapon. It proved to be a vital piece of evidence. But an even more dramatic development was to follow. Bamber's girlfriend went to the police shortly after they split up, a month after the killings. She told detectives Bamber had confessed he planned to kill his family.
He said to me with quite a lot of vehemence that he'd get rid of all of the family, including Sheila and the boys, and he would do so by shooting them.
Without a doubt, Julie Mugford's statement to the police, in which she said that Jeremy Bamber had confessed to her, caused the case to take on a whole new direction. All of a sudden, from murder-suicide, it now becomes murder for gain.
Bamber was arrested, charged and convicted on 5 counts of murder. He's already spent 26 years in jail and has been told that in his case, life means life. Now I am reviewing new and exclusive evidence submitted by his lawyer Simon McKay. He says it could cast doubt over the conviction of one of Britain's most infamous murderers.
It would be the worst miscarriage of justice the British criminal justice system has ever experienced. But my approach to miscarriage of justice cases tends to be to review the evidence and make a decision based on that as to whether the evidence supports the conviction or doesn't. In this case, my review of the evidence inexorably leads me to the conclusion that this conviction is not safe.
The Crown had always claimed, and the jury accepted, that Bamber attempted to pull off the perfect murder, framing his mentally ill sister Sheila and claiming the inheritance. Bamber, on the other hand, has always insisted his sister Sheila Caffell carried out the killings. A claim Bamber reiterates when he calls his lawyer from inside Full Sutton maximum security prison.
I think that there is no question that Sheila was responsible, and I don't think she was culpable, because schizophrenia, tragically, doesn't make the person responsible for their actions. And in the many years since Sheila's awful tragedy and the illness that she suffered, I think the understanding of schizophrenia and the effects of mental illness on those who kill family members and their own children is much more understood.
Jeremy Bamber, now 51, was convicted at the age of 25. He's now spent more time in prison than as a free man. At the original trial in 1986, the judge, in his summing up, directed the jury to 3 crucial questions. Did they believe Julie Mugford or Jeremy Bamber? Did they believe that Neville Bamber had made a phone call to his son Jeremy in the early hours? And were they sure that Sheila did not kill the others before committing suicide? And in particular, did they believe a silencer was used? If so, they could conclude Jeremy was guilty. The discovery of a silencer was an important part of the prosecution case. Former murder detective Mick Gradwell has reviewed the case.
The way the silencer was presented in the court case back in 1986 was that it was key to the prosecution case, and the judge really summed up to that effect that members of the jury, if you feel that the silencer was attached to the weapon, Sheila Caffell could have not have killed herself with that weapon because her arms aren't long enough. So it's really crucial to the whole prosecution case.
The prosecution also argued that the silencer was on the gun when Neville Bamber was attacked and shot in the kitchen. Red paint found on the silencer matched red scratch marks on the shelf above the Aga.
It cannot be more significant. The judge, in summing up, told the jury that on the evidence of the silencer alone, you may find Mr. Bamber guilty.
Forensic tests carried out as part of the original investigation found a speck of blood inside the silencer matching Sheila's blood group, suggesting the silencer was on the rifle when Sheila was shot. However, in the early days of the investigation, police believed that they were dealing with a murder-suicide and not a mass murder. Later, there were concerns over the thoroughness of the evidence gathered.
The Scenes of Crime Officer, Inspector Ronald Cook, admitted that when he received the silencer, it had a grey hair on it, and when he delivered it to the Forensic Science Laboratory, the hair had been dislodged and couldn't be found. The judge, Mr. Justice Drake, said the
Cook says the hair could have been picked up by contamination and its evidential value was useless.
Well, when you read the evidence of the way that particular item of evidence was found, it hasn't been found anywhere near in the manner of the quality you would expect of such a key exhibit. It was missed by the police, it wasn't found for several days, and then it's found by relatives. When they find it, it has got paint on it, hair on it, blood on it, and generally the whole integrity of that evidence is very poor.
The mistakes that would have been made was the, if you like, the command structure and the investigation. It was like a ship without a rudder.
So in the early days of the investigation, do you think that there were things that could have been done better?
Oh, certainly. With hindsight, yes.
The 2 gunshot wounds to Sheila's neck, one immediately fatal and one not, make up a crucial part of Bamber's new evidence. His legal team has had photographs of the 2 wounds examined by ballistics experts in the United States. The prosecution argued in the original trial that if the silencer was on, Sheila could not have pulled the trigger. But Bamber's legal team now says it has strong evidence that the silencer was not on, and therefore Sheila could have killed herself.
The experts we have used in America, and the principal expert, has reviewed over 3,000 deaths by firearms. But he could not be clearer. All of the wounds to Sheila are entirely consistent with the threaded barrel of the gun, not the smooth-ended silencer.
We showed the new reports to forensic firearms specialist Philip Boyce. Having worked for 27 years in the field, he is one of the UK's leading ballistic experts. Philip carried out some of the same tests as the experts in the States. using the same model of rifle, silencer and bullets used in the killings to determine whether a silencer was on the rifle when Sheila received the fatal shot.
Philip, Sheila's a slight lady, 25 round shot on that evening. Any problems with that?
None whatsoever. A small person or even a young child is quite capable of firing this rifle without any ill effect because the recoil is so small.
The fatal shot was what's known as a contact wound, the gun pressed against her skin. Using pig skin to simulate human skin, Philip carried out tests to find out what residue marks would be left with and without a silencer.
Show me what the effect is.
You can absolutely see the difference between the shots in that you've actually got the mark of the end of the silencer, whereas without the silencer you don't have this mark.
Now you've looked at the photographs.
I have.
These are Sheila's injuries.
I have.
Which would you say is the most likely to have occurred?
Based on my examination of the wounds on the photographs and the test that I've just done, I'm of the opinion that the contact wound to Sheila's chin was actually contact without the silencer fitted.
The results suggested that no silencer was on the rifle when Sheila was shot, making it possible she did pull the trigger and kill herself, although that would mean she had somehow shot herself twice. The court also heard that a silencer was on the gun when Neville Bamber was killed. He was shot 8 times, beaten, and sustained 3 burn marks at the top of his back, somehow inflicted that night. No conclusive explanation was ever given for the burn marks at the original trial. Now Bamber's legal team has suggested they could have been caused by the heated end of the rifle. Philip tests this theory by heating the end of the rifle and the silencer.
So, explain these marks to me.
What I've actually done on this side, I've actually heated up the silencer on the rifle to approximately 200 degrees, then pressed it against the pig skin in order to burn it. The other 3 sets of marks where I've taken the silencer off the rifle and heated the muzzle up to approximately 200 degrees in order to ascertain if the burn marks could have been made by either the silencer or the muzzle of the rifle.
Now you've looked at the photographs, and these are the photographs with the burn marks on the back of Neville Bamber's back.
I have.
Can you draw any conclusion from doing this test?
From doing this test, what I can say is that the marks on Neville Bamber's back could have been produced by the muzzle without the silencer fitted, but they could not have been produced with the silencer fitted.
So for the silencer to be on that gun, if it had come into contact with Neville Bamber's back, they wouldn't have left those marks?
They wouldn't, no.
This is the solicitor.
Bamber's lawyer instructed a burns expert in the United States to conduct the same tests. These tests also found that the burns were consistent in size, shape and diameter with the rifle. However, the burns expert did say further tests would be needed.
The Crown case was that the silencer was on the rifle throughout the incident. The Crown case was that at the point in time Mr. Bamber was attacked in the kitchen, that the silencer was on the gun. Here we have the clearest possible evidence that at the time the burns were inflicted, which must also have been whilst Mr. Bamber was in the kitchen, the silencer was not in fact on the rifle.
We tested whether the rifle became hot enough by firing it. It didn't. So it's still not certain how the rifle became that hot, or indeed if it was the rifle that caused the burns. Bamber's legal team also questioned the evidence of ex-girlfriend and key witness Julie Mugford.
She's key, central evidence to the whole of this case. She is saying that Jeremy Bamber had discussed the dislike he had for the family, that he was thinking about killing them, he was planning killing them, and indeed he admitted to her what he had done. So really it's central to the case and the strongest piece of evidence that was presented by the prosecution.
At the original trial, the jury was directed, if they believed Julie Mugford over Jeremy Bamber, they should convict him.
I wasn't actually ever frightened of Jeremy. I didn't think he'd actually do anything to hurt me. But as I kept on saying to him that I had to say something and I couldn't keep this in and questioning him, he became frightened of me, which is what made me become frightened of him.
Bamber's new legal team is concerned about another interview she gave to a tabloid newspaper for which she was paid £25,000.
What we then know is that immediately after verdict, she's taken into media care by a national newspaper. We now know that to be the News of the World, and soon after the verdict, a story appears in the Sunday edition.
In a witness statement, Mugford said she could not remember exactly when the deal was agreed, but in 2002 the Court of Appeal found that Bamber's own legal team was unable to establish that she had sold her story before the end of the trial. Bamber's new legal team believe that if the deal was signed before the end of the trial, it could have had an impact on the verdict. Julie Mugford did not respond to our attempts to contact her.
Do you believe that Jeremy Bamber will one day have his conviction quashed and be a free man?
Yes, and based on the work that we've been able to undertake recently and the quality of the expert evidence that we have that appears to exculpate him, I'm extremely confident that his case will be referred back, and in the final analysis the Court of Appeal will quash his convictions.
I'm pragmatic, and I take one step at a time, and I think so long as the evidence actually goes and is accepted by the Crown, and I believe it will be, the prospect of getting out it's quite exciting. It's quite frightening too, but it's quite exciting.
Having reviewed the original case, looked at the new evidence and heard from many of those involved, including Jeremy Bamber, it's clear that nearly 3 decades on, this case continues to stir emotions. The questions remain: will Bamber get his case referred to the Court of Appeal? Or will his relatives finally be able to find closure?
I just want to make it very clear to anybody out there that Jeremy is a guilty party. He's not an innocent person.
I'm totally convinced that Jeremy Bamber's innocent. I think this is one of the gravest miscarriages of justice that this country's ever seen. I really do.
I feel from looking at the overall circumstances that it's a safe conviction, and that Jeremy Bamber, in a cold-blooded, calculated way, killed his family, and I think the evidence does point that way quite significantly.
It's quite extraordinary to actually be sitting here giving an interview some 27 years later. I don't want to put it straight that it's time it stopped.
The Criminal Cases Review Commission says its decision on whether to refer the Bamber case to the Court of Appeal will be made in the next few weeks. Now, if you'd like more information on tonight's programme, please visit our website at itv.com/tonight. Until next week, though, good evening and thanks for watching.
Coming up next week, because we're worth it. In tough times, why is top pay soaring?
You pay peanuts, you get monkeys.
Are we really all in it together? Is it their greed or our envy?
disturbing in modern criminal history. On the 7th of August 1985, at White House Farm in the village of Tolleshunt DArcy, Essex, 5 members of the same family were shot dead in a bloody massacre. Among the victims, 6-year-old twin boys. The police at first believed that beautiful former model and mother of the twins, Sheila Caffell, a diagnosed schizophrenic, had shot her family, then turned the gun on herself. But it was her brother, Jeremy Bamber, the sole surviving member of the immediate family.
The judge said, "I have to consider when it will be safe to release you to live in the community. I find it difficult to foresee whether it will ever be safe to release someone who has killed 5 members of his family, shooting 2 small boys asleep in their beds."
I've spent years investigating crime, and for me, the case of Jeremy Bamber remains one of the most fascinating, and who was convicted of the killings.
It almost had everything, if you like, you know, from a story point of view. Handsome young guy, ex-girlfriend, a jilted girlfriend giving evidence against him, and of course 5 deaths, including 2 6-year-old boys.
The judge called Bamber evil almost beyond belief. He is one of only a few prisoners who's been told he will spend his whole life behind bars. But Bamber has always protested his innocence. In 2002, his case went to the Court of Appeal.
Tonight, is this man evil beyond belief?
I just want to make it very clear to anybody out there that Jeremy is a guilty party. He's not an innocent person. There are 5 dead people in churchyards, and they're not going to come back.
Or wrongly convicted of killing his family.
I think this is one of the gravest miscarriages of justice that this country's ever seen. I really do.
Good evening and welcome to the Tonight programme. It's one of the most notorious and shocking crimes in living memory, a bloody massacre at a remote English farmhouse with a beautiful young model, her 2 sons and her parents shot dead. Now, nearly 26 years after Jeremy Bamber was jailed for life for murdering 5 members of his family, new forensic reports are casting doubt on his conviction. In tonight's exclusive, former detective and criminologist Mark Williams-Thomas takes a look at the new findings and hears from the man who, after all this time, is still protesting his innocence in Bamber The New Evidence.